All right. Hello, everyone. We are just getting started. We're going to give it a couple minutes for some folks to join before we hop in. Super excited about this topic and our amazing panel today.
Thank you for inviting us. This is exciting to be with all of our colleagues. Really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Sonia made the point in one of her posts where she said this might be the first time we've had all of you together in one place to talk.
I know.
Some amazing UHGers in the chat. Hi, Cammy. Cool. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started with 4 of you on the panel and a lot of knowledge to share. I want to make sure that we get everything that we can from you all and soak it all in. And so again, thanks everyone. This is our 6th and final part of our People Analytics Unplugged webinar series. Though we've been asked to do many more, Rachel and I need a break. So we're going to take a pause. But we will be consolidating all of these in one place so you can see them all. And all of the recordings are live on LinkedIn at the moment. But we will be consolidating them all in one place so that they're easy accessible. And we've also talked about using the audio for a mini podcast series too. So more to come on that. But super excited to have all of you here and to have our panelists. Today, we're talking about listening at scale, which for those of you that know Rachel and I, it is probably our favorite topic to talk about. And through this series, we've got a couple of questions of where does listening fit in within people analytics? And so really wanted to bring this surprise panel together because we didn't have it originally on our plan, but through all the questions, really wanted to bring it in and talk about it. And so Al, you were up first on my list, but would love for introductions and then just kind of jumping into what do you view as a listening ecosystem? What are the parts of that? And so we'll give everyone an opportunity to respond, but Al, you're first up on my screen. You jump right in. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm Al Adamson. I will answer it in this way, as I had the great fortune and honor of running employee surveys at Gap Inc. 20 years ago. And that, in effect, started my employee listening journey in the formal sense. And one of the key elements that was evident then, which is evident now, is not only asking the appropriate questions that are aligned with the values that are being promoted by an executive audience, for example, but also making sure that we're taking appropriate action based on the questions that we're asking. And there were several gaps that were present, and fast forward 20 years, that's still the case. So I think there's huge opportunity for our space to shrink the gap, if not close it, between what we're asking and what we're taking action on. So that's what's top of mind for me.
Awesome. A little bit about your background and kind of what you do now.
What do I do now? I am the Senior Vice President of Leader and Workforce Transformation at Perceptic. So I'm responsible for consulting, research, partnerships, and thought leadership. So very honored to be a part. I'm a veteran of 3 months. So it's a new role for me and very excited. And I also had the great honor of founding and running People Analytics and Future of Work community and conference series for many years. And so here I am. So thank you for having me.
That was really excited to have you, and again to be on this side where I get to ask you all the questions this time. So love it, and glad to
try to do my best.
Awesome, Melissa, you're up next on my screen. Do you want to do a quick brief intro and then a little bit about the listening ecosystem?
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm Melissa Arante. I lead the employee experience practice at Medallia. I've been there for 5 years now, and prior to joining, I was a customer of Medallia, so I'd been running EX and CX programs in Medallia. So a unique background, having both EX and CX, only CX for 2 years, but you can count on most of my answers incorporating something about the customer. So the key components of an employee listening strategy, I'm only going to give you 3, and I think only 3 are needed. One is the ability for the company to ask what's important to them, of employees, when it's relevant. The second is empowering our employees to tell us what's important to them at any time. And the final one, and I'm not sure if we'll call this a component, but I think it's the most underused part of employee listening, is text analytics. Just allowing our employees and managers to tell us anything at any time, and then using the back end to understand what they're telling us, I think is the most powerful tool we have today and potentially the most underutilized.
Really love that. Text analytics is so critical, especially with all the comments and things that we put into surveys. So thanks for adding that. Anna, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm Dr. Anna Hewlett. I have been practicing as an IO psychologist for over 10 years, getting closer to 15 at this point. I got to update that part of my intro soon here. I have worked internally running, enterprise-wide employee listening at UPS several years ago. I've also worked internally at Johnson & Johnson and spent many years as an external consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton. The past several years, I have continued being a consultant, but for Qualtrics. So I'm an XM scientist at Qualtrics, where I serve as a methodology SME for our customers on all things employee listening, as macro as designing a holistic employee listening strategy for your enterprise across the talent lifecycle, and as micro as what exact word are we going to use on this survey item. I'm so excited to be here today. And of course, I agree with what has already been shared by Al and Melissa in terms of elements of that employee listening system and strategy. But I'd also like to add a few things to the mix around what I think is also critical to have alignment with your overall organizational strategy, as well as your organization's talent strategy, making sure your employee listening program is connected to both of those elements as well. The other elements I want to mention are starting with the end in mind and focusing your program on what will we do with this data? Who will be accountable? How will we support those folks so that they can be successful in taking action on these insights? So that's me, and excited to keep the panel going.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. And over to you, Sonia.
What a fun group. You're right, Stephanie. I was probably like the most excited when this came about. I was like, so fun to have everybody together. So my name is Sonia Lucina. I am the president at Question Pro Workforce. I run our employee experience business unit. I also am an IO psychologist. I will not tell you how long I've been practicing. It's a little bit longer than Anna. So I won't put a number on it, but it's been a while.
No need.
Yeah.
It's been years. It's been, maybe decades. And so to me, I think what's really interesting about employee listening, and something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is I always try to parallel the work that I do to my personal life. And so I was born and raised in former Yugoslavia, in Serbia, and then I spent a couple of decades in the US, a little bit in London, and now I'm in Buenos Aires, Argentina. So with all of that in my life, I've learned 3 languages at different parts in my life, and I travel a lot, and my team is all over the world. And so I'll give you a couple of quick anecdotes that will lead to my takeaway. So when I first moved here, my husband and I would talk and, would say something and be like, relax, relax, relax. And after a while, I was like, dude, you got to stop telling me to relax. Like, that's not going over very well. Well, it turns out in Argentina, like, tranquilo is like, you just, pass by and say it, no big deal. In the US, you tell somebody to relax, like, so not that well received. And now when I was recently in India, a lot of my colleagues were WhatsApping each other, which is very common in Latin America, still a little less in the US. And I was WhatsApping someone. I'm like, why? Oh, no, here you have to call in India. They don't really answer. I was like, what? Oh my God, so many nuances. And so this actually, Stephanie reminded me of one of our listening conversations recently, is that it's so important for us to stay in tune, both within a country and really globally. What makes people most comfortable to open up? Like, what's the way for us to ask and receive that information? If it's in surveys, is it something that really needs to be anonymous or people will not answer? Does it need to be a link? Does it need to be in a QR code? Does it need to be a conversation? Do we really need to sit down with someone? And when Steph and I were talking about that, I was having flashbacks to my dissertation, again, some decades ago, where I literally would write down and code everything by hand. And I'm like, oh, now we have so much AI, but wait a minute, that can still give us such rich resources. So it's really to think about, who do we want to get this rich information from? And then where's the best place to meet them? How do we ask and how do we take that information to make them the most comfortable to share what's most valuable to them?
So really want to hop into it. And so I see a couple of folks active in the chat. Hey, Matt from Austin, and Jackie, good to see you from Chicago. Make sure you keep the chat active with any questions you may have as we jump into the panel a little bit. And so we've got some of the biggest hitters in this space on this call: Perceptics, Question Pro, Medallia, Qualtrics. And so really, as we think about employee listening as a whole, what should employee listening be impacting? What are some of the organizational outcomes we expect to see change because of listening strategies that companies may put in place? And Anna, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. There are certainly a whole world of potential outcomes, but I think one of the first that comes to mind is attrition and turnover. And I do want to preface this a little bit by saying, while maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that would be, an immediate answer to say, yes, attrition, we can impact attrition with employee experience insights. And we certainly still can today. I do want to talk about briefly the way that our kind of cultural ideas around intent to stay have really shifted during and post pandemic. So I want to mention that that's certainly still an outcome that we should be tracking and using our employee insights to better understand, particularly around groups like high potential talent, or perhaps there are certain diverse groups of marginalized individuals that we're targeting and trying to really work and maintain that sense of retention and commitment and engagement to the organization. Overall, we are seeing a little bit lower intent to stay post-pandemic, but I think this is a really fantastic place to better understand key talent groups, why they're leaving, when they're leaving, and how we can intervene and retain some of that top talent. So that's the first one that comes to mind for me.
Love it. Anyone else want to add to what Anna mentioned?
Alan. So, and I love your answer. And I gave this a lot of thought because I thought, goodness, like employee data should impact everything. And then one thing that I started to thinking about really is the bottom line, right? And popular, unpopular answer, I don't know, because any of you that know me, I have like all the best intentions at heart. Like if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I want to make people happy. Like that's why I do what I do. Now, with some experience, I've realized that for an organization, if you can align your employee experience and your customer experience, which I know a lot of us do, when you can find data that really clearly shows your CEO or CFO that, hey, like really, if we have happier employees, like we're retaining more of our customers, we're making more of the money, that comes back to trainings for employees, to promotions, to more headcount, so there's less burnout. So I gave the caveat of an unpopular answer because I didn't want people to be like, oh, but Sonia, like, come on, where's your heart? Why is it revenue? But in so many ways, if we can make that tie, and if we can understand how we can have that clear impact, it's one of the best ways that we can reinvest in the organization and give employees some of those biggest things they want, right? Because one of the most terrifying things to ask on an employee survey is, are you satisfied with your compensation? Because nobody ever almost is, or are you really happy with where you are in your career? Meh. If you're an organization when everyone's like, yes, I love it, call me. Because all the market research I do, all the organizations we talk with, it's one of the lowest scores. So that's where my mind really is how can we continue to more effectively think about tying that employee data because of all the good that we want to do for our employees, because of the DIB initiatives, because of the well-being, because of the career growth. But how can we continue to talk about in such terms that really realizes that bottom line impact of the organization so we can reinvest more effectively in our people?
If I can add on to Sonia's comment, I completely agree. And I focus on the bottom line too. And the reason I think it's so connected, as you described, is because our employees joined our companies to deliver on our brand promise. That's why they came here, because they believe in what we do. And their job isn't just their job for so many. It's their life. It's their identity. We meet someone and we say, I'm an analyst, right? Or, I'm a software engineer. So That's why they came here, and that's why it's already so tightly tied. So the ability to bring the data together, as Sonia mentioned, and be able to look at what happens in the employee experience and how does that impact customer outcomes. Once we tie that data, we could look at cross-sell, we can look at upsell, we can look at share of wallet, we can look at repeat visits. There's so much value there, and that's why our employees are here, and that's what they want to tell us about.
May I chip in? Let me thank you for sharing. Thank you for asking. And Stephanie, again, thank you for putting this forum together. I'm honored to be a part. And let me share this for context. I grew up in management consulting in the 90s, and the balanced scorecard was a prominent organizational framework, a mental model by which to measure the overall health and interconnectedness of an organization and how employees impact the customer experience, how they impact organizational efficiency and effectiveness, and in turn, downstream outcomes. So one of the things I get really concerned about is when we talk about employee behaviors and perceptions impacting financial outcomes, which are very much downstream. Now, you go back to the Sears Service Profit Chain, February 1998, Harvard Business Review linked employee satisfaction with sales and profitability. And it was explaining a very small impact, but an impact nonetheless. And it measured in the millions of dollars. And it was a fantastic piece of study that was replicated at Cardinal Health and in different industries over time. So the linkage is unmistakable. It's there. One of the things that I just want to call out as you're designing an employee listening program is that all of us, regardless of the vendor that you have, you're going to impact what I would call level 1 outcomes. Engagement is an outcome, and that drives retention, which would be a level 2 outcome, in customer satisfaction and innovation. But financial outcomes, there's so many variables impacting financial outcomes. It's the industry in which you're in. So being very mindful of the limitations of that downstream linkage, but also because you can do everything right in HR in terms of your talent strategies, you can drive up engagement, you can improve retention. Those financial outcomes are not guaranteed because we're dealing with open systems. So anyway, I just want to call that out. At the end of the day, it depends. And we have to set realistic expectations about what we can actually link and show associations with. Hopefully that made sense.
I love that. I think that was a really good point. It was kind of wrapping up everything that everyone said. It's like, it depends on just being realistic, right? About what you can impact and what you can't. That's a good point. So all of you work for organizations that are providing employee listening technology. What are some of the advancements that you're seeing kind of shaping the industry right now? Melissa, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. Well, I'm actually going to comment on so many technological advancements that we've had for many years that we're not taking advantage of in employee experience and employee listening. I'll just start with video. Employees can provide feedback by video, and we have customers doing that. One of the things that helps us with is, Sonia mentioned, having global employees, when they can provide feedback by video or voice, their words can be translated in real time from their native language to English. So they can speak in the language that's comfortable for them, and then executives and others can consume it in English or whatever their native language is. And then I'll just mention one other: digital surveys, putting a survey in tools that employees use every day. So the moment that they have feedback or an idea that we can get from them, that's one of the ways that we can easily tie it to customer outcomes, because we can hear from them. Why was it hard to do their job at that moment? Or why was it hard to do that transaction with that customer? When we improve that based on their feedback and ideas, we can directly tie that to customer outcomes and ultimately revenue.
Others want to jump in? Go ahead, Al.
Al, you go ahead.
No, me? Well, first off, I want to comment on what Melissa said. Absolutely love that. In terms of technological innovations too, and I know Medallia is talking about the ability to activate on the insights as well. So at Perceptics, have launched recently intelligent nudges that's based on the system for which they're responsible at that point in time, also giving agency to the individual to focus on the areas that they want to focus on, and thirdly, from the organizational level. So that advancement is going to drive habitual behaviors around the themes that are most impactful to improve the key metrics that are important to the employee experience in that group. And the final thing I'll say is that regardless of what technology that you use or what method that you employ, and it was said earlier, beginning with the end in mind and understand the outcome that you're trying to drive is going to be paramount. So I see a lot of noise and confusion, and hopefully there's a focus theme. So it's not from the employee perspective, there's just so many asks that it gets diluted, and the actions in the best case scenario are very focused, for example, around growth mindset or whatever is going to drive cultural transformation in a very intentional way. So, Anna?
Yeah, and I would just have to do the obligatory mention of our friend AI, and go ahead and break the seal on that one. I'm certainly sure that multiple, like I'll mention, regardless of kind of what vendor you're working with or technology platform you have, there is so much exciting advancements happening around the use of AI in employee listening. And I can speak from my organization in particular, where after my many years of being a grad student, manually reading and coding thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of comments, I am so excited about our AI comment and open-end text analysis features that are coming down the pipeline. And again, we're not the only ones that are innovating in this space. So hopefully, no matter kind of where you are with your technology providers, you're getting to see some of these exciting innovations around AI, and not just comment analysis, but another feature we're working on is more of a virtual assistant that you could have managers perhaps ask things like, where should I be focused? I'm overwhelmed by these results. What's the most important thing for me to focus? Or what's the one takeaway I should be focused on here? Or what's the one thing I should be concerned about? So those are some examples of AI innovations that are coming through. And again, that's surely just a few of the many applications of AI that we're going to be seeing as time goes on.
Yeah. And I definitely plus one, Anna, you for AI. And I was laughing the other day because to me, so many people that I've talked with, when I say, hey, what would you like to see better in employee listening? A lot of them say, talk about the open-ended analysis. And I know with several of you, I've talked in the past about, is there ever going to be a day that AI is going to be as good as a human brain to really understand what's going on and to really affect them? I don't know, hopefully, but the jury stays, is still out. And to get the most out of AI and the human brain, I was laughing because last week you were saying, back in the day when you coded things. So I hung out with my friend AI and got this enormous output of, I think it was 9,000 rows in Excel of suggested keywords and categories in a few different languages. And I was rocking through. I'm like, all right, PhD brain, we got this. Is this right? Is it not right? Let's talk to AI. Let's figure this out together. In that best effort to do that. And I would say one more thing that people ask us a lot that we're working towards is, I think today a lot of organizations are afraid of what they don't know. It's I don't know what I don't know. Can you help me know what I don't know so I don't overlook something really big? Because if I don't know to ask. And there could be something bubbling up with our employees that's so big and so significant and so timely. And if I don't see it, that could be a really huge miss. So that also usually goes with open-ended, because my goodness, we can only ask so many closed-ended questions on a survey, right? No matter how frequently you ask it. So it's that ability to ask it in an open way and start to find those things bubbling up that maybe you wouldn't have thought of. But earlier we were talking about Gen Z, and I'm like, trying to learn Gen Z? I don't know. It'll take a little bit. But again, that's a really great way to use some of that technology, is to ask some open-ended questions and then start to see what do different individuals feel like, and start to be able to get to the nuances maybe faster than, again, our human brain could, sifting through all of that information just alone.
Mm-hmm. And Tanya, I'm going to start with you with this next question while you're up on the screen really big. But it's a two-part question. Switching gears a little bit from technology to strategies within organizations. So this first one being kind of the first part of it, what are some innovative strategies you've seen companies implement with the listening strategies that have led to positive impact on employee experience? but also what are some common challenges that you're seeing?
Yeah.
What are some things that you've seen organizations kind of hit bumpy roads on where they've needed support, and how have you helped them work through that?
Yeah, so I'll try to keep this contained because Steph, I feel like this could be like a 2-hour monologue, and I promise I won't do it. You can shrink me if I start to. So, one of the things I don't know how many of you saw, and I need to play it back because I had a meeting at the time, but Eaton Wesley from Water Cooler was talking with Simon Sinek about some of the behavioral data they're looking at, and so I've had the pleasure of getting to know Eaton for like probably about the last year and a half and studying some of his data. And so I think there is still a big opportunity. One of the things that he and Question Pro collaborate on is the behavioral data coupling with the survey data. And how do you make sense of what's happening, right? How do you make sense? I know big conversation topic in a blog post with Simon Sinek was, engaged people seem to be working on the weekend. So maybe that's okay. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. So again, I still need to rewatch the conversation later. I don't know what happened, but I think that there is a really big opportunity still between the what and the why and how organizations do that. Now, there are a ton of, I know, still privacy issues with behavioral data and different things like that. So I think there are some ways that we can channel surveys to more effectively understand that. But I think that that is one big area to look at. And one of, one of the areas that I still think most organizations haven't fully figured out, but there's some promise in it. And the second one, this is an interesting one. It's how much ability and access managers, direct leaders have to have these conversations with their employees, whether it's through a survey strategy or different conversational ways, and autonomy to make a decision. And so when we think about still, these annual surveys, or even if it's quarterly, whatever it is, usually it's from the top. And a lot of times managers get their own data. But how do we empower them to really look at it as a way to have an ongoing conversation with their own employees, with their own group, and get information they know how to act on, but then also know what to do with that, right? Because that's always my big struggle around, we want to empower managers because we want to give them all these technologies and tools, but are we empowering them with information, or are we just overwhelming them with more responsibility, but not with enough ability and knowledge to know what to do with that? So I think that's another area where I think all of us collectively here kind of moving towards, but still figuring out what's that best balance between technology as an enabler, and then knowledge as something that empowers. And one thing that is still a challenge, I would say, is, we're still seeing some of our clients like, oh, we're not asking often enough. Now we're asking too often, it's too much. And still the paralysis of action planning and action taking. Oh my God, thank you for the nods. I want to give you a hug. I'm glad we're not alone. I'm like, please, somebody else tell me you're out there. And it's hard. Like I was thinking leading up to our conversation today, like how many of us at some point in our life have said, oh, I'd love to drop like 10 pounds. And you would think, okay, so I can drink a bunch of water, I have little weights under me, but let me tell you, it's not that easy. And maybe one goes, maybe two goes, so it's not that we sometimes don't have the tools. It's not that we don't have ideas, but sometimes they're real life challenges. And how do we overcome those? But how do we also, maybe the lack of traction, the lack of progress that we'd like to have, how do we make sure it doesn't discourage us? And to say, my goodness, I've tried this now 10 times. What's the point? Well, there are different ways to approach it. Maybe there's somebody else that can help me. Maybe there's different inputs that I can get. But I would say in that whole cycle, that is still the biggest opportunity. And I think to Al's like financial point, kind of a different example, but there's so many inputs, right? There is resources, and there is budgets, and there is time, and there is knowledge. Like it's not an easy switch to flip, but I think anything worth doing a lot of times will take a lot of time and energy. So if you're somebody listening, and probably most of you are like, yep, been there before, know you're not alone, and know that it's worth it. And definitely lean on the community like the ones here, because again, you can see pretty much everyone like nodding their heads that it's a common problem, but all of us together and with our respective clients and with the community are trying to figure out better ways to help each other get from point A to point B, better ways to actually accomplish those things that we really want to accomplish, but that are really hard and are just going to take time, but are possible. So I think I've covered them all, Steph, and hopefully not in too much time.
All good. Anyone want to jump in on innovative strategies or common challenges?
Yeah, if I may quickly, like we mentioned AI, we have AI assisted action planning and something called Comment Copilot, which is AI, and I mentioned intelligent nudges. AI is going to be table stakes, but there's also a caution around the use of AI and the ethics thereof. And so, there's the appropriate questions that you ask in your due diligence process, and where do you apply it and where you don't, I think is something that we all have to be very cognizant of. So I'll just put that out there, because while I believe in the power of it, I also believe in our need to be prudent in its application. So just to call that out, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. What I do want to focus on is this, because Alexia, thank you for your question and comment. Quickly, what we have the ability to do around engagement is an index, and when you index 4 items, 5 items, whatever it is, you dilute the variability in the item. So our ability now to go to the item level and action on those, I think, is an important distinction that is something that we can leverage. So I'll just call that out as an opportunity, because we've kind of gotten stuck on engagement, arguably, in some cases. And the final thing I'll say on this is the ability to solicit ideas from the workforce at large. So crowdsourcing, Alexia mentioned, that gives the feeling that they've been seen, heard, and empowered. And particularly if that's played back, hey, we've heard you, and now we're taking appropriate action. Not only that you feel a certain way, but you've put forth ideas because you're closest to the work. And now we take those ideas and actually put them into practice. That's hugely empowering. So if we can make that a habit at scale, then I believe good things are happening with your learning program. Frankly, I'd just like to see more of that as a practice throughout organizations across the world, but not happening yet.
I'm happy to add on, Stephanie, if I can. You asked about a strategy. The strategy I've seen most successful is integrating the employee continuous listening with existing business routines. So instead of creating it as a separate process, which we do with the engagement survey for good reason, but when we're doing continuous listening, as some of the others have talked about, the purpose is to give feedback and ideas to local teams, local managers, and employees. So integrating it, what they do. Do they have a weekly huddle? Do they have a daily stand-up? Do they have a staff meeting? How do they communicate? Is it email? Is it Slack? Is it some other method? Using those so that it's part of what they do instead of being something that's kind of on the side. And then the second, you asked about obstacles. So I'll just give one, but I do think it's probably our largest obstacle, our own perceptions about what employee listening is and what we think we can do. I think as an HR function, we hold ourselves back by thinking there's just a particular area we're responsible for. We're here to support the business and impact the bottom line. And we have the ability to do that with continuous listening. And our perception that we should hold back and do less is what restricts us in really effective continuous listening.
Thumbs up on that.
Yeah, and I'll round us off with not too much different from what folks have already shared, but something that's come to mind, especially also I saw a question in the chat asking about what do many organizations get wrong with employee listening. And so I think that kind of reminds me of one of the central challenges I find with some organizations is it can be very easy to have the employee listening efforts turn into a check the box exercise, score chasing exercise. We need to hit this score. We need to increase every time we administer the survey by 2 percentage points, things like that. That is not the point of your survey. The point of your survey is to get real, candid, valid experience data about what people are truly feeling. And sometimes that may not be a positive result. We would be concerned probably if every single time you asked a survey, your score went up in a stepwise linear fashion, because experience is secular. It's not necessarily linear. We love to use our example of the pandemic, but beyond the pandemic, think about inflation and the macroeconomic ebbs and flows that we've had in the past few years. Organizational changes. My own organization was recently acquired almost a year ago. If we had continually seen all of our results just perfectly increasing in a little line, that would be a concern that that's not really reflective of the real experiences folks are going through during a big period of change. So I think one of the challenges and missteps that organizations commonly go into, which I totally understand where they're coming from, it seems like from a performance management perspective, we want to set measurable goals. We want to set goals, that are standard and applicable to all our employees, but really, we don't want to over-index and focus too much on reaching a certain score, because the point of the survey is to build psychological trust, to build that connection and that relationship with your employees, to understand what they're experiencing and where you can take action to make change. Yes, of course, we want to see over time generally a positive trend in experiences, but don't set yourself up for failure or get distracted by thinking you need to increase at a certain point or hold managers accountable for particular increases in a certain time period, because really the point of this exercise is to get that insight about what folks are experiencing so you can change and take action. And sometimes that means scores will fluctuate, and that's okay. So that's what I wanted to add there. And great audience question. Thank you.
I love that, Anna, and I'll just add something super quick, and then we can move on to other questions. Is that as you were talking, it made me think of this. I have no idea if it's an actual theory or if it was something made up, but it's called a 4-burner theory. And the idea is that it's really hard to have all burners on at the same time. So for organizations, like one of the things that we usually recommend is don't ask about a bunch of things you can't impact, because it's going to be kind of a bummer for people. Now, it doesn't mean like don't ask about anything, because you can't do anything. But it's also, to your point, when organizations are going through a lot of change, and we all know like there's internal things that you can impact, and then there's external factors that are sometimes just going to happen and you're not going to have influence on it. You have influence on how you react, but you don't have influence if there's going to be a recession or there's going to be a pandemic. And so for organizations also to think about, like, okay, let's say we're just measuring things that are really important to us and that we know we can take action on. But which ones are the most important? Which ones are the ones that are like, this is really me? And like, no matter what happens, like, this is an area that I really want to show up for our employees. And then when you think about your time and resources, you know where to focus. Because to your point, without fail, like at some point, all of us, like, especially when you have a, close-ended scale, like you max out. It's not like a revenue generation can keep going. Like if you're using 5-point scale, you got 5 out of 5, you're there. So it's not necessarily just the growth and being higher, but also just focusing and maintaining those areas that you say, this is the essence of who we are as an organization. So even with internal challenges, even with external challenges, we'd love to be great at everything. But knowing that that's going to be probably impossible, these are at least the things we want to make sure we don't take our eye off of.
Love it. No, that's a great ad. I think almost all of you have mentioned action as you've talked, and kind of that being one of the challenges in terms of how do you take all the survey data and really put it into action. I remember, and I won't date myself, but many years ago, there was at PsyOp, there was like a giant like mastermind kind of conversation about using employee insights and data to drive action. And I feel like years later now, we still have the same conversation where we're still trying to figure out how do we take all of our survey data and really drive an impact, and who do we drive it through? Is it through business partners and all these different pieces? And as a employee listening person now, in my organization, it's the same conversation we are all having. And so would love to hear from the experts here, like how are your organizations thinking about actioning, and how are your platforms that you're using, how are you enabling action in those platforms and making it a lot more, not easier, but more straightforward about how to go do those things and really drive change. Al, I'll start with you this time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm asked quite a bit after 14 years, 15 years of running my own company, why did I join Perceptics? And yeah, it's the team, yeah, it's the space, but it's really about this, because I was tired of talking about insight generation and dashboards and data and all this stuff. I want to see meaningful change happen at speed, at scale, and in a sustainable way. So it's not just a one-off. So when I see the roadmap at Perceptics with intelligent nudges and AI-assisted action planning, and given agency to managers and individuals and leaders on what the appropriate action can and should be, while also enabling them to focus on the areas that are important to them, because last thing we want, and what was struggle with the nudge theory, is that I was skeptical. I don't want to be nudged. I don't want to be told what to do, but I do want to be empowered with insights and ideas that I have a high likelihood of working, that I know has a high likelihood of working. So that's where our behavioral science team comes in. And we have over 2,000 nudges that in a library that's continually updated based on a variety of constructs that we're continuing to learn about. So that, frankly, is fun for me. Do I think it's the ultimate solve? No, this is always going to be a challenge. There's always going to be opportunities to learn and improve. So it's not about having the right way. It's about being open to ideas and different systems and different types of individuals, how they're going to consume the insight, how they're going to devise their own means in which to move forward. So at the end of the day, it's not about a template. It's not about, even nudges. It's about creating a system and a set of processes that provides them agency to take action that they feel is appropriate. And that's where I get really excited. And the final thing I'll say, which I missed saying, is that we're continually providing what we're calling agile research into the product. So it's like, if I want to take action, then I have now leading practices, research-based ideas that can help me identify the best way forward strategically. So if you want systematic change, great. If you want behavioral change at the individual level, you can have that. So that's where it's part of the solve, but it's not ultimately the solve. So there's never such thing. So hopefully that's going to improve us to take appropriate action at scale.
Yeah, and I definitely have some thoughts to add on to that, Al. This is an area that I get super excited about, and would start just by, circling back to what I mentioned in my introduction. You should be, as you're developing your survey strategy, you should be developing your action strategy, thinking about who should take action, who should own action, how are we going to support them, how are we going to keep them accountable, and if we don't have the answers to those questions, should we really be asking? So my recommendation generally is when people ask about frequency, how often should I be asking surveys? We love frequent data. We love more insights, but I challenge folks to say, let's balance that with our ability to take action. And when in doubt, if we're trying to say, oh, should we ask more frequently or not? I say be conservative. Ask less frequently to be able to take more meaningful action than asking more frequently where you're not able to move the needle and take action. And some specific ideas that I've seen lately that I think are really fabulous would be utilizing your additional survey touch points like pulses, not just to get more data on the same kinds of information, but utilizing your pulses strategically as a tool for action tracking and action driving. So that would be things like asking questions on the pulse for folks that might be things like, my leader has shared the results from the previous survey, or my leader has shared their commitment to action from the previous survey, or my leader has communicated progress updates. And for those who say, yes, I do know what's going on with my leader and their commitments, asking follow-up questions like open-ended, maybe soliciting ideas. So you've confirmed already in the survey that your leader shared their commitment to action, but now qualitatively, do you have any ideas that could be helpful for your leader so that we can then get that back to them and they can use that to fine tune and pivot where they've already been focused. So I love using our pulse survey as a strategy to encourage accountability, progress, and keep that top of mind. Another area is, you've already heard my thoughts on creating score-based targets. And while I don't love that, I do love creating targets around action planning. Things like number of action plans created or a number of action plans that reach 50% progress by the end of a quarter or a certain period of time. So those are some specific ideas that I've seen work really well in organizations to really encourage and reinforce action and also support the accountability for taking that action.
Oh, Stephanie, I have so many thoughts in this area. I'm going to try and be really brief and just give a few, but I think we all are passionate about action following a survey. So I ran my first engagement survey in 2005. We were working on getting managers to action planning then. That survey had been running for a decade before I had taken it over. And we know some companies were running surveys many decades before that. we're still talking about action planning in 2024. I feel like we have the opportunity to challenge our assumptions about how do we take action following a survey, and is action planning the way? Could it be, as Al mentioned, crowdsourcing? Could we immediately give themes to employees directly and let them ideate in crowdsourcing to give managers very specific ideas of how to take action, or empower employees to take action themselves in places where they can? Right? Also creating templates for managers that make it really simple for them to immediately contact their team or individual employees with what they're doing. And one of the simplest things to measure the impact of action, just ask the employees. We're depending so much that a manager is taking action on question 22. And the thing that they're doing, we're expecting that somehow the employee recognizes the things that they're doing first came from the survey and came from question 22. And to show that it's impacting them, they need to provide a higher score on that. I think those relationships are too tenuous, and we have an opportunity to do something that's more impactful and more straightforward.
And I'll just quickly add as a bookend, I love all of this, and I feel like I'm learning so much from everyone, so thank you. And if any of you noticed the funny grin on my face as Al was talking, is every time he talks, I realize how long he and I have been friends, because at Question Pro, he talked about empowering. We actually called our action planning platform Empower, just channeling that. So when he was saying it, like, me too. I think it's something that's important to empower people. Just one, without reiterating all the great things everyone else has said, one of the additional things we're leaning into, and this is a little bit maybe from like my previous life and my previous job at another company, is recognition. So one of the things that we're experimenting with, on top of like, templates and themes and access to employees too, is let's celebrate the people, right? So we're looking at some data like who's involved in the most initiatives, who's leading, who's providing ideas, and experimenting with ways to give those people visibility, because that's a lot what we've seen in our market research and our client surveys, is that people still love to get recognition, and most organizations can still be better at it. And so we're saying, how can we take one challenge and another challenge and combine them and see if they can help solve each other? I think even if, of course, it's not going to be a magic bullet, as we're saying, like nothing probably is, but we saw it as a really nice way to, one, encourage people to prioritize, especially when you're pulling in employees, especially when you're pulling in people that can make a really significant difference. But in reality, they're taking time away from their day-to-day job and dedicating it to changing something that's important to them and important to their peers. But again, all of us have only so many hours in the day. And how do we celebrate them? How do we encourage both them to continue and their colleagues to take part by saying, thank you for doing all of these things. You're so meaningful to us. So that's just one thing. I think I love that we're all thinking about, similar approaches, because hopefully we'll start to crack it together as we go down the line. Because Melissa, as you were saying, like, my goodness, this has been a problem for so long. But again, so if, some other organizational issues that I talked to my husband about, who's not an organizational psychologist, not an employee, and I'll tell him, well, if this was easy to solve, like we wouldn't still be talking about this. Like it would have just been solved. But here's to hoping, and especially in having great conversations of all of us together, that we'll be able to somehow move the needle a little faster. And the next time, Stephanie and Rachel, you have us together, we'll be like, action planning, no problem at all. We've got it.
Yeah, and I have one more thought, actually. Real quick. I just want to mention too, and I think Melissa and Sonia, you were kind of getting at this in your conversation too here, is that demystify action. It doesn't have to be this formal 25-page, multi-bulleted report. It can be smaller micro actions, like if your opportunity area is around communication. Maybe it is, making a change in the format that you do your regular team meetings, or maybe you don't have a regular team meeting. Set that up. There you go. If it's recognition, maybe it's just building in 5 minutes into your regular occurring meeting or existing communications to highlight recognition and progress that folks are making. So the action doesn't have to be some massive initiative. They can be, and there's a time and a place for those. And usually those should probably be owned by, more strategic owners and leaders in the organization, and not necessarily the average frontline manager. But action can be small, can be informal, and still have great impact. So just want to mention that as well when we think about action. Make it less of an intimidating hurdle and more around any change is better than no change, even if that feels smaller or informal.
Yeah, Stephanie, if I might just jump in on that, what we're looking at is individual, team, group, and organizational action. So, appreciating the dimensionality of action, because it can be esoteric, as was alluded to. So being very specific on what level the change is going to happen. So for an individual, obviously individual change, how they show up, it could be a team dynamics, group, it could be a cohort, it could be a underrepresented group that has a certain experience, and how do you take action strategically. So there's a variety of dimensions that need to be appreciated up front, and then questions asked accordingly, with the idea of certain actions taking place, but with the openness to learn as well. So no, it's a great point.
Love it. I feel like we could have an entire panel conversation just on action planning. And so with this, for the sake of time, we'll switch gears real quick and try to squeeze in at least 2 more questions in the last 10 minutes. And this one is one that's really important, just because as we were having this People Analytics series, it came up a lot of where does employee listening fit in this puzzle? And I mentioned a little bit in the introduction. And so would love to hear from you all, just where do you feel like employee listening fits within HR functions, within people analytics, within performance management, learning development, all these different pieces? What is kind of the role of employee listening in those buckets? Where does it fit? And then this also probably ties to a question Teresa had on just should it be in-house? Should it be out-house? And then external, with engaging in consultants too. So thinking about employee listening as a whole internally, where does it fit? And then also from an external perspective, should it be something external or internal? And I'll start with you on this one.
Okay, great, fabulous. So I will first, I guess, answer the part of the question about where should this sit and who should be owning this, and skills and things like that. So here I like to take a really practical approach and encourage self-awareness and reflection about your current organization. Theoretically, you could completely take care of this in-house. Theoretically, you could completely take care of this out of house with your external consultants. It really depends on the resources and skills you have at hand in your organization. So that's why I encourage that self-awareness, self-reflection, thinking about your specific needs. The skill sets exist inside of organizations and outside of organizations, and the right fit is really going to be dependent on your individual organizational situation. That said, if you're asking about skill sets, I certainly would say folks that have a background in strategic talent management or strategic human capital management is always fantastic, paired with strong skills in data analysis and insights and presentation, things like that, so that you can both have that more granular focus on how to interpret these specific results from a certain survey or a certain survey program, but can also have that ability to zoom out and connect to larger parts of your organization and your organizational strategy. So if that sounds like a unicorn or a diamond in the rough, you may just have multiple folks bring different levels of those skills and kind of pull together a complementary group that may not be one single person or one single team, but likely could be multiple folks that may also be, again, a mix of internal and external, depending on your individual situation. And then to answer the part of the question around pulling this into employee survey results into your other kinds of functions, one that I think I'd like to spend a little more time on is one I mentioned earlier around using your operational data, your HR data, your people data, to come to understand how to use your survey insights at the same time as those. So that could be, for example, using performance ratings and coming to identify who are our top performers at the same time as using those results in combination with your exit survey data, your attrition data, and engagement data to start to build a predictive attrition model and see, okay, where are we seeing these experiences start to change for our high potential talent? We could maybe even bring in onboarding and track from the entire, employee journey where our folks are having changes in their relationship with the organization, with their engagement, their sense of inclusion and well-being, and start to design interventions ahead of time before our top talent starts to take their foot out the door. Because like I mentioned, the whole world has really changed their perception around intent to stay and commitment to organizations in the past 4 years. And so it's even more competitive, even more of a priority for organizations to start tracking and understanding their top talent and figuring out what motivates them to stay and how we can maximize their time in the organization and hopefully keep them for as long as possible. I'll let the other panelists share some other ideas here too.
Great. So I'll go next, if that's all right. I'll be brief. We talked about where could employee listening sit within the organization or outside. At Medallia, many of our customers are not in HR. They're in operations, they're in sales, they're in contact centers, and they're in customer experience. And they're coming to us about employee listening. They want continuous, always-on employee listening for employees to have the opportunity to provide feedback and ideas about the work itself and how they serve internal and external customers. So I think we're at a point that if HR doesn't change the way they approach it and broaden the goal of employee listening, other functions will take it up. The piece about integrating employee listening data and other functions, every function in the company should have access to this data. We don't have to share race and gender, but feedback and ideas from employees are valuable for every function in the organization, and providing it to them in real time so they can quickly see where IT or facilities or many of the operations groups supporting our employees every day can get feedback quickly and make changes to make it easier for our employees to serve their customers.
Should I jump? I'll jump in real quick. First off, Stephanie and Rachel, thanks for having us. Thank you all for who joined and providing your questions and listening and learning along with us, because I too am learning a lot as we're going here. Very simply, it depends. That's a typical consultant answer, but depending on the size of the organization, depending on your internal capability, depending on your goals, it can sit anywhere. And I've studied this for 20 odd years, and I'd love to provide a leading practice, but there's so many dependencies, so many variables at play. It really is what's most appropriate, given, again, your goals and internal capacity. And then frankly, there's a shortage of talent to do this work. So for me, I would tend to lean first and foremost on buying or using one of the vendors that are so capable here. And there's consultancies that are skilled at doing it. So if you're going to develop an internal capability, you better be a large organization. You better be in it for the long haul. But again, honored to be here. And Sandy, you want to bring us home on this topic?
I'll just do a big ditto. I know we have 2 minutes. So love it. Agree with everyone. And one thing that I'm thinking about, because totally, of course, it depends. I think either route that you choose, even if you do something internally, maybe you don't need a consultant, but talk to someone externally. Because what I see a lot of times, especially organizations that have done something for a while, for any of us that do something for a long time, is like we start to get a little bit of the blinders, right? We lose a little bit of that innovation. And so it doesn't have to be a formal engagement. It doesn't have to be anything big. It could also be talking to your peers. Hey, what are you up to? But keeping that conversation external always, I think, really sources and fuels ideas and innovation. And worst case scenario, just confirms you're doing what you should be doing. But I think more often than not, it gives some of that additional energy and additional like, I didn't think of quite of that, but let's do it. But again, it doesn't have to be in a formal way. I would just say a lot of us, myself included, sometimes I find myself in a silo and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, there's this whole big world around and there's so many people who are smart about this, and let me go have that conversation. So I would just add that little bit to all the great answers ahead of me.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I know we are at time, so we'll go ahead and wrap here. Thank you all for joining us. I do want to make sure, Anna and Melissa, any closing statements? I know Sonia and Al just had theirs. We want to make sure there's nothing else you wanted to say before we hop off.
No, just thank you all for being here today. Thank you for your engagement with questions. Thank you to the other panelists. This was so amazing to connect and learn from you all. And thank you, Rachel and Stephanie, for organizing.
Yes, I'll just say thank you also, and I hope we have a part 2 at some point.
Yes.
Yes, most definitely needed. We didn't even get to all of our questions. Really appreciate you talking, taking the time to chat with us. And thanks everyone for joining and listening in.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, y'all.